Most of the bigger studs this year now are advertising in Italy, France, Germany, looking for riders to ride here in Ireland. There's a need for riders.
Actually, one house went up £20,000 in a day.
Wow.
£20,000 in one day. They didn't want to let us, they don't want to let foreigners, as I was considered then, but I'm Irish and proud of it, they didn't want to let foreigners in.
I and some of my colleagues were on the last bus out of Baghdad before the Americans flew in.
Need I say that the first major change was a change in the church and the attitude to the church.
Eddie McDermott Rowe, a professional jockey from County Sligo, emigrated to Australia. He is now back in Ireland. I went to meet Eddie in Sligo in his hometown. Eddie, tell us, why did you leave Ireland and where did you go? What was the Ireland like when you leave Ireland in the 70s?
I left Ireland in 1979. I was a student at the Irish National Stud in Stud Farm Management. I got a scholarship to travel. Of the guys in my year at that time, most of us wanted to go to Kentucky or England or wherever. And I got wind of this place in Australia, Lindsay Park it was called. It's owned by the Hayes family. 10,000 acres, 300 horses in training, 4 stallions, 400 or 500 mares, and I just thought, yeah, that sounds good. And got the scholarship and headed off to Lindsay Park, South Australia. That was 13th of September 1979.
And tell me, what was the Ireland like at the time? You were in Kildare, I believe.
I was in Kildare, yeah. Ireland was, it was struggling, I suppose, would be the best terminology I could use for it. It was hard work. It was hard work. Racing was just on the, it was just starting to go down a little bit from, there was a very high point in the early mid-70s, and it was just starting to feel the crunch a bit. And yeah, it was. I thought, the options were to at least have a look outside. And the plan was to go to Australia for 6 months, Kentucky 6 months. But I got to Australia, and 15 years later I got home.
So what happened when you got to Australia?
Like everybody that first leaves, I'm sure I had the old homesickness, and the Irish field was a lifeline every week, and you'd hang out from the letters from home or whatever. But once you see the system and you start reading the papers and making friends and looking around you and sort of getting the feel of things, and you realise, well, maybe this isn't too bad, I mean, before going, I knew Rolf Harris, boomerangs, kangaroos, that was about it. I hadn't a clue what to expect. And I remember being on the plane thinking, what have I done, But no regrets now, I mean, it was a fantastic experience, fantastic country. Well, it was just, I mean, working for the Hayes family when I went out first, I mean, it was just unbelievable. I mean, I was there the first year they trained 300 winners in a season. I was there for their first Melbourne Cup winner. I mean, these were momentous occasions, I mean, then there were the sad times, like, we had a champion, a people's champion, a horse back then called Dulcify, who was the Arkle of Australia as such, the Desert Orchid. And I mean, he ended up getting killed in the Melbourne Cup the year before they won it,
And since you're back now, you're trying to set up training schemes and training young people in the horsing industry. Tell me how you're doing that.
Well, what we're doing here is we've leased a yard here in Sligo, which is in Colleenamore Stables, which are probably the only facility around here of its class. I mean, it is a very, very good facility. We have 28 stables out there. What we're doing is we're taking on 20 kids at a time for 30 weeks. And we take these kids from basically knowing very little about horses through to the stage where they're actually able to ride a bit of track work. Now, our whole emphasis is on track work because there's a huge need within the industry. Like, I mean, most of the bigger studs this year now are advertising in Italy, France, Germany, looking for riders to ride here in Ireland. There's a need for riders. And that, as I say, they can go and get letters after their name if they want, and they're still going to be very hard to find jobs for them. There's a need for riders. If they can ride, there's jobs.
And are you getting a local support from the local authorities, FOSS training schemes and things like that?
Yeah, we are, yeah. Which is, we couldn't do it without them. I mean, it's a very intensive to take kids' raw material and turn them into riders in 30 weeks. It's very, very intensive. And thus the need to have a horse per student that they're responsible for, that they ride, that they're reportable to us insofar as the horse's condition is concerned, and the bonding, and that they're riding a fresh horse every day. Because as I say, I could take these kids to riding school for 27, 30 weeks and send them out into racing stables and have them. I've seen it myself. You see the kids from Pony Club, enthusiastic. All they want to do is the right thing. They get on a racehorse, and that's the last time you see them. Injuries and as I say, what I'd like to see is these kids finishing the course, that they're able to go to a yard and say, right, I might be able to ride your hardest horse, but I can ride your, whatever. And from there, then they'll still be in a learning process, and they'll be in a learning process as long as they want to ride horses. But they'll be in a situation where they'll have a level of competency that they're employable.
On a wider level, like what would you like to see the changes in the Irish horsing industry, betting shops, that kind of thing, the money spinning around through that and all that?
Well, in South Australia, the thoroughbred industry was the third biggest employer. It sort of sounds a bit ridiculous when you look at racing here in Ireland. As I say, we're the mecca. But the reason being was that all the money that there was no betting shops. They're all TAB, government run, and all that money is going back into the industry. So like your average Saturday race meeting is like, 3 times what they get here, just, for your average Saturday race meeting. And all that money is going back into the tracks. It's going back into, maintenance of the track. The whole racing industry benefits from it, rather than it just going to a chosen few. I'd like to see that happen in Ireland. I think, the day we can crawl out from under that rock and sort of stand up and say, well, right, look, it's here, that's it. You go to if you have a bet on the races and you lose, that money's going back into racing. It'd be nice to think that was happening here as well.
Celine de Koning, a saleswoman from Dublin, emigrated to Belgium in the 60s. She is one of many recent returned immigrants. You went to Belgium, Celine. Tell me about how did you end up in Belgium?
When I went there on holidays, I was round off in Ireland and decided to find a holiday, and Belgium was the only place available, and I believe in fate. So I took the only holiday that was available at the time, and fell in love with the coach driver when I got there.
Oh, really? How did it happen? Tell me.
Well, he was winking at me in the mirror, and I winked back, and one thing led to another.
And you fell in love with him?
I fell in love with the coach driver, not really with Belgium, but with the coach driver.
Okay. So tell us what sort of cultural differences you encountered in Belgium when you finally settled down in Belgium with your husband.
Well, initially, the language was a terrible barrier. I didn't understand a word anybody was saying. I was in the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium, so it was literally double Dutch to me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand a word anybody was saying. I didn't find the people very friendly because they didn't integrate too easily. 30 years ago, they weren't as open to
other European nations.
That's right. Okay. Yes, yeah. So I felt very lonely and very isolated.
So you finally settled down, regardless of all these language barriers and culture barrier which you felt. And then you played a very important role there. I mean, you played an unofficial ambassador for Irish food products in Belgium. Tell me about it. How did it happen and how did you do it?
I saw an ad actually in an Irish newsletter in Brussels for somebody to promote Irish beef in Belgium, and I thought I'm the right person because I spoke fluent Flemish and I was always promoting Ireland anyway. So I went for it and met this girl who came from Paris. She worked for On Board Bia, and between the pair of us and another man, Mr. George Dykmans, we brought Irish beef to the Belgian supermarkets.
Tell us how you started your journey back home.
Well, I believe in fate, like going to Belgium 30 years ago and meeting my husband. And last May, I won 2 flights to Ireland. My husband and I came in May. And when I went back to Belgium, we arrived back on the Saturday. And I said to my husband, we put our house on the market. And on the Tuesday evening, a young couple phoned and asked could they come and look at it. And I said, give me time to clean up the kitchen, which I did. And they came, and on the Friday night, it was signed, sealed, and wrapped up.
So you started your sort of resettling home period. Tell me about, did you find it easy to find a house or?
No, it wasn't easy at all.
Really?
No, it was very, very expensive to start with because we had to go back and forwards a good number of times to try and find a place. I didn't want to go back to Dublin for obvious reasons. I wanted to get out of the rat race. And we eventually ended up in Galway. My brother lives in Galway, but we had a very, very bad deal from an auctioneer in Galway. He kept gazumping us with, they didn't want us to, for some reason, they didn't want us to settle down there. They didn't want us to buy a house there. They would put it up £500. Actually, one house went up £20,000 in a day.
Wow.
£20,000 in one day. They didn't want to let us, they don't want to let foreigners, as I was considered then, but I'm Irish and proud of it, they didn't want to let foreigners in. There was for some reason, they wouldn't sell to us.
So you become a foreigner in your own country.
A foreigner in my own country. That's the way I felt.
And so you eventually couldn't sort of settle down in Galway.
No. And my brother-in-law said, have you ever been to Westport? And I had climbed Croagh as a teenager, but wasn't interested in the beauty of it then. I was only interested in having a good time. So we came over to Westport. I haven't been unhappy for a second. I love it. I really do. I love it. I found a great job. I was only here a week.
Oh, really? You found the work as well here?
Yes. My husband, when he was here alone, he went into a jeweller's store and bought me a brooch. And on one of my visits, I called into the girl into the jeweller's store and I was looking for earrings to match. And we got talking and she offered me a job because...
Is that the same earring you're wearing?
No.
No. Oh, right, okay. Just joking. How your son is finding it in Ireland back here? Is he settling well, or education problem, a school problem, anything like that?
Well, last year when we decided to come home, we started looking for him for a place in college because he was doing the equivalent of his leaving in Belgium last year. And we went over to the CAO offices in Galway and we got everything. We did everything according to plan. And about 2 weeks ago, we were waiting for his place because he'd made 20 applications. And the Monday morning arrived and he'd been refused a place anywhere.
Out of all 20 places?
Out of the 20 places, nowhere. And he had good results for Belgium.
So do you think that the Irish point system in the Irish education system are not quite well tuned into other European countries?
Yeah, we're supposed to be Europe. And, you know, here he was with his European diploma. It's supposed to be all one now. And it just wasn't working for us.
Deirdre Quinn Schmidt, a professional nurse, emigrated to the Middle East in the 80s. Deirdre told me how glad she is to be home.
I left Ireland in 1983. I was working in the Mater Hospital in Dublin in the open heart surgery unit there for 4 years. Enjoyed my work very much. I was living in a rented apartment in Dublin, and I decided, number one, that I would eventually like to own my own apartment, and the only way I could do that was to go abroad and earn tax-free salary. And my plan was to come back, and that's what I did, come back and buy an apartment in Dublin.
So you were a qualified nurse before you left?
Oh yes, I was qualified. My nursing career brought me all over the world and back.
So tell me, where did you go?
First of all, Baghdad was my first stop off. And from there, I returned home for a brief period, bought my apartment in Dublin, which I was very happy about. I was a week home and I decided to, I saw a lovely apartment in Rathgar. And then I decided my next move would be with the pharmaceutical company in England. And I was there for a year and decided then to go to Saudi Arabia.
Deirdre, tell me, what was Iraq like before the war, while you were working there?
Iraq, for me, and particularly Baghdad, because that's where I lived and worked, was a very diverse city. You had, like you have in all cities, you have the poverty areas, and then you have the very wealthy areas. Some magnificent hotels in Baghdad. We actually stayed in the President's Hotel, and because our apartments weren't ready for the first year, so we stayed in the hotel.
Did you have any extraordinary experience?
In my travels. Well, one of the extraordinary experiences or feelings that come to mind was that I and some of my colleagues were on the last bus out of Baghdad before the Americans flew in.
All right, at the time of the war.
At the time of the war, just before the war, and we flew to Cyprus, and it was touch and go whether we would be allowed to leave the country. And of course, hostages had been taken before, so we were hoping and praying that we'd have a safe flight out.
What was the life in Saudi Arabia?
Well, there is a large expatriate or expat community in Saudi Arabia, and we generally mixed with people from other nationalities. We very, very seldom mixed with the
Saudis.
Only in a work capacity.
And at what point you have decided to return home?
I can't say there was a definite minute or hour that I decided to come home, but it was just in general. It was just the longing and the missing of family occasions, especially, and friends. And I always had our local paper sent out, and it came to the stage where money didn't matter anymore. The quality of life was very important. And
Perhaps the family life is
the family life, yeah. And me personally, I'm very much into family life. So I returned to Ireland, Dublin, back to my own apartment, and decided from there, myself and my husband, who was German, I met in my travels in the Middle East. We were looking for a project or a business that we could both be involved in. And one day, my husband found a nice ad in the Donegal Democrat for. It was a small family-run hotel in Creevy in Ballyshannon in County Donegal, and we visited to have a viewing. We came up to Donegal from Dublin on a motorbike because my car was stolen in Dublin.
Really? Oh.
And we decided, particularly my husband, when he saw the place and the beauty of the place overlooking Donegal Bay on a dark, bleak winter's day, and we decided there and then to buy it. Since we've come back, I can say that it's not always red and rosy. You have to work hard. If you want something, you have to work for it. And I think
So you've big sort of given up your nursing profession, or are you still involved?
No. Our company has taken a different route. We have a private home nursing service, nurse on call service in Sligo, which is very new up the side of the country. I researched and with my husband, of course, he's my business backing, researched the project for a year and a half, both in England and Germany, and we're receiving a very good response so far. But it's like everything, you have to, whether it's here in Ireland or abroad, you have to work very hard. You have to go out and get it.
The things are they as professional as abroad, or are they slow and all that?
I would say things are as professional as you want them to be, and I in particular would be a very professional person. My experiences through the years, and of course our experiences in with our hotel in Donegal. Of course, I'm mixing my nursing profession with business, and the two can mix very well.
Jim McCabe is a semi-retired educationalist, also from County Sligo. I went to talk to Jim McCabe in his comfortable surroundings in Sligo.
Yes, I left Ireland in 1969 and went to Paris to join UNESCO, IIEP, that is the International Institute for Educational Planning and Administration. Now, I left having resigned as CEO in County Sligo. Accordingly, I was certainly facing a challenge in Paris. You asked about the Ireland that I left. Now, at that time, Ireland was beginning to gear up for entry into the European Common Market, and education emphasis was quite strong. And accordingly, I was in a way going ahead to challenge the very system in Europe and to see what it was like. Therefore, I left more or less as a challenge and left to Europe to understand Europe better and to be involved in the international community.
Your brief period in France, followed by your journey to cross Atlantic to United States. Tell me about how did it happen?
Well, after some 5 years in Paris, the moment had come to perhaps look again at where my future lay. I did have an offer from the European Commission in Brussels at that time, because Ireland had joined the Common Market at that time. But in family, we looked at this, reflected upon it, and the general feeling was that Brussels was not going to be all that much different from Paris, French language and so on. And a newer challenge across the Atlantic seemed more inviting, in the sense that the World Bank was a major international organization dealing with a much broader field than even the European Common Market. So accordingly, we decided to go to Washington. I was recruited by the World Bank, became projects manager for Europe, Middle East, North Africa department at that time. I should say that the World Bank is divided into separate sectors: agriculture, education, so on. I was an educationist, therefore the education sector and development of education in developing countries. It so happened that I was assigned to Algeria, very strong country in terms of background, an oil-producing country with plenty of funds to invest in its education system. Accordingly, I was dealing mainly with Algeria, but dealt with most of the countries in the Maghreb at that time, and indeed moved into southern Europe, Greece, Romania, and some of the Middle East countries, and even as far as Afghanistan.
When you return in the I would say in the mid-90s or late 90s, what sort of socio-economical cultural changes you have noticed, and something which you can pick out very obviously?
Well, the changes were massive from 1969. Of course, I had kept in touch. I visited each year. Nevertheless, it was quite dramatic, the changes from 1969 and from the moment that Ireland had joined the European Common Market. First of all, need I say that the first major change was a change in the church and the attitude to the church. As a strong practicing Catholic myself, from a very strong background in that regard, I was amazed to see that younger people had quite a different attitude, and now practicing Catholicism was becoming quite changed, and many younger people didn't look at it in the same way as previous generations had. The second major change I saw was that in women. Now, Ireland had been a traditional society by European standards, by international standards in that regard. But now, increasingly, women were participating in the workforce. And of course, this had to do with the opportunities in employment, which now had developed. It had to do also with, of course, the increased participation in the education system itself.
What sort of infrastructural changes you have noticed, or do you think a lack of that?
Yes, indeed, there were major changes, physical changes, which were very obvious from the moment you landed in the plane in Dublin. Clearly, Dublin in my days in the 69 to get past Lucan and out to Maynooth was in itself a challenge. Now, the major infrastructure development with the European aid was very noticeable, and of course the road system, as is well known now, has developed massively since the late 60s, early 70s. But I have one small complaint to make in this regard, and if I dare say it, I mean,
by all means,
I'm living here now in the Northwest, and I'm amazed to see in a country, a small country like Ireland, that the distance from Dublin to Sligo is still difficult to travel. Let me add one further point, and it has to do with the earlier point on the infrastructure. We are here quite close to Belfast. For me, it's easier to go to Belfast than it is to go to Dublin. But yet the route from Belfast to Sligo is rather, shall we say, ordinary, relative to some of the routes, say, Dublin down the East Coast. And I think it would be reasonable in deference to the people in the north to give them the chance to be able to make their way down here south, and likewise for us to go up north, which is quite close to us.
Is there any sort of idea of developing Yeats Museum?
I have a very strong interest in Yeats. I was a founder member and first president of the Yeats Society in Washington, together with Senator Eugene McCarthy, who was a tremendous inspiration to me with regard to Yeats. But naturally, when I came back here, I joined the Yeats Society, and I'm happy to be on the council of the Yeats Society now. Where the wandering water gushes from the hills above Glencar, in pools among the rushes that scarce could bathe the star, we seek for slumbering trout, and whispering in their ears give them unquiet dreams, leaning softly out from ferns that drop their tears over the young streams. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand.